12 men went in. When LCDR Marvin Downs gave the order to count off before extraction, the number came back 13. No one moved. No one spoke. 13 operators in identical multicam, identical plate carriers, identical rifles, all faces under camo paint in the dark. Somewhere in that formation was something that had been watching them for 48 hours, learning their voices, their cadence, their call signs, their breathing patterns on open net, and it had learned well enough that no one in that circle could identify which one of them was not human. This is the account of what happened in the hours before that count. The briefing lasted 11 minutes. That is shorter than the standard pre-operation package for a reconnaissance mission into a declared military exclusion zone, and LCDR Marvin Downs noted the discrepancy without remarking on it to the room. The slides were minimal. 40 square kilometers of old-growth canopy in the Gifford Pinchot National Forest. A grid designation, Sector 7 Delta, and a mission parameter sheet that used the word organism, where Downs' experience told him the word threat should have appeared. Passive surveillance, biological sample recovery. No kinetic engagement unless contact was initiated by the target organism. He read that last line twice and folded the tablet closed and told his team to draw their kits. Nobody asked questions. Unit 0 had learned early that the questions worth asking were rarely the ones you could ask in a briefing room. Aviana Witt did not attend the shared briefing. She received hers separately, 30 minutes earlier, in a room that Downs had attempted to enter and been redirected away from by a man whose credentials did not correspond to any unit or agency designation Downs recognized. When Witt joined the team at the tarmac, she carried the expression she produced whenever she knew something she was not authorized to transmit, a particular flatness around the eyes, an over-careful neutrality of posture, the face of a person managing the gap between what they hold and what they can release. Downs had worked alongside Witt on 3 prior operations. He had learned to read that expression the way you learn to read, whether on an open ocean passage, not as information itself, but as a warning that information is located somewhere ahead of you and moving toward the position you currently occupy. They inserted by helicopter at 2200 hours, fast rope into a clearing designated LZ Bravo. 12 operators hitting the ground in sequence under the rotor wash and pushing immediately into the tree line before the sound of the aircraft fully separated from the canopy. The forest received them the way old forests do, not with resistance, but with absorption. The engine noise retreating into the overhead canopy the moment they cleared the clearing perimeter. Point man Conor Reynolds was already 10 meters ahead of the main element before Downs called the first communication check. He ran it on primary frequency, encrypted by call sign. 12 transmissions came back. He logged it. 12. The GPN VG-18 quad tubes transformed the forest into green-white geometry, trunk columns, ground fog at ankle level, deadfall, the irregular architecture of a place that has never been managed or mapped in any detail that mattered. Reynolds moved on the right flank of a dry stream, using the grade for sound discipline. His silhouette visible to Downs only as a thermal ghost at 25 meters. The rest of the element extended behind in modified column at 5-meter spacing, weapons indexed low, emissions discipline in full effect from the moment of insertion. No unnecessary transmissions, no white light, no thermal flood, unless contact was imminent. They moved 40 minutes without incident, and then Dylan Reed called a halt. 2 quiet syllables on the net, actual comms, and something in the understructure of those 2 syllables made Downs move forward immediately without waiting for the next sentence. Reed's hands were already working the radio chassis when Downs reached him, both gloved hands moving with the precision of a man who is diffusing something he cannot see. "I am reading a secondary transmission on the TeamNet," Reed said. "Encrypted, correct protocol, correct authentication waveform. I cannot identify the source terminal." Downs crouched beside him and looked at the chassis readout. The signal was there, a ghost presence on the frequency, authenticated but sourceless, producing no actual content, just the carrier wave of a transmission that wanted to be a message, but had not yet decided what to say. "Ridge reflection," Downs said. It was the most operationally convenient explanation. Reed said, "Yes, sir." Neither of them believed it. Reed staged his backup frequencies and said nothing more. They moved forward. The ghost signal logged itself in the back of Downs' awareness and stayed there for the remainder of the mission. The first thermal anomaly appeared at the 60-minute mark. Reynolds' monocular picked it up a heat signature at canopy level, 40 meters forward and 9 meters off the ground, moving laterally through the upper branches at a velocity that the width of the canopy could not accommodate without the sound of branch contact. There was no sound of branch contact. Reynolds called it with the clinical understatement that point men develop as a survival mechanism. Contact, thermal, canopy level, 40 meters, moving right to left. No acoustic signature. Downs cross-referenced on his own NVG. The shape was irregular, not a recognized animal profile, not a human profile, not a bird mass, not anything in 11 years of special operations recognition libraries. It was approximately 3 meters in vertical extent, and it was moving through the canopy the way water moves through a system of channels, without resistance, without announcement, without leaving evidence of its passage in the branches. It must have been contacting its speed. They halted and let it pass. Protocol for an unidentified thermal contact at distance was observation before engagement, and Downs exercised it with the discipline of a man who has seen what happens when that protocol is inverted. David Arnold came up on the left flank and positioned himself with the stillness of someone calculating structural loads in this case. Whether the trees around him were adequate cover against something that weighed what that silhouette implied. Malcolm Wilson was already prone 30 meters back, scope trained on the contact's last position, and Downs caught the very slight change in Wilson's breathing that meant Wilson had seen something through magnified glass that he had not yet decided how to categorize. Tessa Tyson had reversed her orientation without instruction, rifle rear-facing, watching back the way they had come. She had heard something behind them that no one else had registered. Downs did not ask her what it was. If it mattered, she would say. Conor Reynolds found the dog tag at the 68-minute mark. He stopped, crouched, produced a closed fist, freeze signal, and the entire element locked in position without a word. Several seconds passed. Then, on the net, very quietly, actual. I have a U.S. military identification tag on the ground at my position. Single tag, placed, not dropped. Downs moved forward. The tag lay in the center of the stream, flat on clean silt, in the exact center of the path the element had been following. Not lost, positioned. He read the name embossed in the metal. It was Conor Reynolds. He looked at the tag in his hand. He looked at Reynolds beside him. Reynolds was not looking at the tag. He was looking at the tree line, with the fixed expression of someone who is choosing not to process something until they have more data. The tag went into an evidence bag. Downs logged the coordinates and made the operational decision not to share the name with the element until they were off the objective. He was not certain it was the right call. He made it anyway, because the alternative was a conversation he did not have the information to finish. The acoustic event occurred at the 90-minute mark, and it was Red who understood it fastest. Because Reed had spent the previous 30 minutes watching for it, without knowing what he was watching for. A transmission came through on the primary team frequency, encrypted, correctly authenticated, carrying the unit identifier and the voice modulation profile of PO2 Conor Reynolds. Designation Viper -2. The content was a distress call, Reynolds' voice in cadence and register, reporting a contact on the north axis, requesting immediate element consolidation at a specified grid. The voice had the breathiness of someone managing pain through transmission discipline, controlled, precise, exactly what Reynolds would sound like if he were hurt and refusing to show it. Every operator on the net heard it simultaneously. Downs turned left. Reynolds was 2 meters from him, fully mobile, uninjured, staring at the radio in Reed's hands with an expression Downs had never seen on Reynolds before. Not fear, but a foundational vertigo. The look of a man whose ground has just demonstrated that it is made of something else than he believed. "Stand by," Downs said on the net, and held the element. Reed was already tracing the transmission origin. "Source is mobile," Reed said. "Consistent with a body mass of 80 to 100 kilograms at canopy level. Bearing 270, moving north. The waveform is correct. The authentication is correct. Voice pattern match to Viper -2, is 93%. Reynolds put one hand on Downs' shoulder. Not a grip, just contact. The touch of a man confirming his own physical presence to someone he needs to believe him, and Downs pressed back once, acknowledging it. He changed the protocol immediately. From this point forward, all communication checks required visual confirmation. No operator moved toward a transmission without eyes-on verification from at least 2 other operators. He did not explain to the junior operators why. Several of them had already understood. Malcolm Wilson identified the creature through the scope at the 2-hour mark, and transmitted his observation without inflection, because Wilson transmitted everything without inflection. ACTUAL. Ghost. Visual on bipedal organism, bearing 270, 45 meters, canopy level, height estimate 2.2 to 2.3 meters upright, moving on upper limbs at speed, inconsistent with observed mass. No acoustic signature. Eyes bioluminescent amber, pulse pattern approximately 40 beats per minute. A pause. It is not looking at the canopy. It is looking at us. 4 seconds of silence on the net. In a tactical communications context, 4 seconds is a long silence. Arnold came on. Actual. Permission to engage. Downs said, negative. Hold. The word organism from the briefing was connecting in his mind to Witt's face on the tarmac, and both were connecting to something he could not yet fully see. He looked at Witt across the formation. She was already looking at him. She mouthed 2 words he could read through the camo paint and the dark, not yet. The first subordinate pack member made contact at the 2:20 mark from a bearing that should not have been geometrically possible given where. Wilson had logged the alpha. It dropped from the canopy to the forest floor, 20 meters ahead of Reynolds, and paused 1 full second, motionless in the IR flood, as if it wanted them to orient their thermal optics toward it, and fix their attention on that axis and not on somewhere else. Reynolds engaged immediately. 2 rounds at 20 meters, both connecting, both producing the impact sound of rounds, striking something denser than tissue. The creature moved through the shots, not away from them, through them, absorbing the kinetic force, and continuing forward in a gait that transitioned from bipedal to quadrupedal mid-stride. Tyson hit it from the right flank at 8 meters, 3 rounds, the third through the eye at close range, and it went down. It did not rise. The amber light in its remaining eye pulsed twice and extinguished. The team had been in contact for approximately 4 seconds total. Molina was already moving toward Arnold, who had a contusion on the left forearm from a branch impact during the contact, before anyone had fully registered that the engagement was over. Reed's radio produced the second transmission 3 seconds after the animal went down, so precisely timed that the relationship between the 2 events was impossible to interpret as coincidental. The voice was Arnold's. Same protocol, same authentication, same register, flat and declarative. Arnold's cadence exactly, reporting separation from the element on the south axis and requesting consolidation. Arnold was standing 8 meters to Downs' left. He looked at the transmission source indicator on Reed's chassis with the expression of a man watching a process he finds professionally offensive. "That is not me," he said, without emphasis, the way he might note a structural flaw in an approach route. Downs ran the new visual confirmation protocol immediately. All operators raised a right fist on command. He counted 11 fists, including his own. He counted again, 11. He logged it. He did not say aloud what 11 meant, because 11 meant something was using Arnold's voice, and it was still in the canopy above them, and it had been listening long enough to produce a 93% voice match on Reynolds, and it had now had additional time to work on the rest of the element. Logan Molina identified the tactical pattern before anyone else did, and transmitted it with the same clinical precision. He applied to field medicine. Actual. Doc. It is sequencing. Acoustic lure to fix our attention axis. Physical contact from the same bearing to force engagement and separate us from the lure's position. We are being herded. He said it the way he said everything during an operation, as diagnosis, as problem statement, not as alarm. Downs acknowledged and called a formation change, tight defensive perimeter, back-to-back pairs, full circle coverage. The second subordinate held at 60 meters in the canopy and produced a sustained tonal event, not a voice, not a call, but a frequency occupying the edge of audible range, producing in 3 of the 12 operators a vestibular disruption lasting between 4 and 9 seconds, a loss of up and down, a temporary dissolution of spatial orientation. The creature was not mimicking communication. It was conducting a frequency operation against their nervous systems. The distinction mattered because one of those things is a biological behavior and the other is a deliberate tactic. Wit transmitted in clear, unencrypted, open frequency, which no operator in Unit 0 did unless something had superseded operational security as a priority concern. Actual, cipher, classification on my source material is lifted by originating authority. This organism carries a classified designation from a 2019 DARPA acoustic weapons study. The mimicry is not behavioral adaptation. It is a biological electromagnetic transmitter. The vascular resonance organ in the submandibular region produces modulated signals in the 2 to 4 GHz range. It has been monitoring our communications since before we inserted. Every transmission it has produced tonight is a reconstruction of our vocal patterns built from this mission's traffic. She paused 1 beat. It learns faster than the study projected. We have approximately 40 minutes before it has accumulated sufficient voice data on every operator on this element to produce undetectable identity imitation. After that threshold, voice alone cannot be used to verify identity in this operational environment. Nobody transmitted for a moment. Then Arnold said, in the same tone he used to describe everything, "It has been listening to us all night." Wit said yes. Arnold said, "Then it knows what we intend to do next." Wit said, "That is the problem I have been carrying for 11 months. Downs called the extraction at the 3-hour mark. Not because the mission parameters were failed. The biological sample from the Downs subordinate satisfied the recovery objective. But because Wit's disclosure had fundamentally altered the operational calculus in a direction that the Unit 0 framework was not designed to accommodate. A target capable of intercepting and reconstructing authenticated military communications belonged in a different conversation, at a classification level above what Downs currently held, and apparently below what Wit already did. He called extraction on the secondary frequency, the one they had not used since insertion, working from the theory that the creature might not yet have sufficient traffic from that channel to reconstruct it. He was not confident in that theory. He called it anyway, because it was the least operationally compromised option remaining, which is the environment in which Unit 0 had always been required to function. The movement to LZ Bravo took 47 minutes. The forest provided no further overt contact during that movement. No thermal signatures in the canopy. No acoustic transmissions. No additional manufactured voices on the net. In some ways, this was worse than continued contact. A predator actively hunting you is a problem with a direction. A predator that has stopped announcing its presence, whose last confirmed behavior was a systematic accumulation of your voices and formation geometry, has transferred the battlefield from the external environment to the interior of the team. Reynolds was walking point, but he was watching the man behind him. The man behind him was watching the man behind him. The formation had converted from a tactical unit into a chain of suspended suspicion, each link uncertain of the integrity of the link immediately ahead. The LZ was clear on arrival. Downs verified the helicopter's inbound timing on the secondary channel, confirmed the pilot's voice against a prearranged duress phrase, and positioned the element in a perimeter along the tree line edge to wait. He ran the preload communication check by voice, then by visual, then asked each operator to state the first word of the mission's operational phrase, a code word Red had generated at random before insertion, and shared with the 12 of them on physical index cards that were destroyed after reading. 12 words came back on the net. 12 correct words. He looked at each face in the NVG wash. 12 right fists raised on command. He stood in the center of the formation and counted. 12, he counted again. 13. The count returned 13, a second time and a third, and at that point Downs stopped requesting it. Because the count was no longer generating useful information, it was generating the same result, regardless of how many times he ran it. And somewhere in his operational training there was the principle that running the same procedure repeatedly and expecting a different outcome is the definition of a compromised system. He stood in the center of the element and looked at each figure in the NVG field. 12 operators he knew, 12 faces partially obscured by camo paint and helmet shadow, and the anonymizing geometry of the quad-tube NVG mount. 12 identical chest rigs, 12 HK416S indexed identically. The 13th figure stood at the formation's eastern edge, between Wilson and Tyson, oriented outboard at the correct security angle. The exact posture a disciplined rear security operator would hold. Its presence in the formation's geometry was correct. The only wrong thing was observable to Reed, running a thermal overlay on a visual sweep of the element. At the eastern position, the eye temperature was running 4 degrees above the ambient thermal baseline, and when the inbound helicopter's IR flood swept the LZ on approach, and every retroreflective marker on every operator lit up simultaneously, 11 pairs of eyes returned the flat gray reflection of a human iris. The pair at the eastern edge returned amber. One slow pulse, then another. The heartbeat of something that had been waiting for this moment since the first hour of the night, learning how to stand in a human formation and pass a head count. Arnold was already moving when Downs raised his fist. Not toward the eastern position, toward his satchel. He drew the thermobaric grenade with the mechanical calm of a man who has located the correct tool for a problem and intends to use it. Downs had 3 seconds to make a decision that the Unit 0 operational manual did not address, because the operational manual did not anticipate this exact configuration. A munition that will reveal which figure in the formation is not human, deployed inside a perimeter containing 11 people he is responsible for extracting alive. Arnold held the grenade without pulling the pin. He looked at Downs across the formation, not with urgency, not with the look of a man waiting for permission to act out of impatience, but with the look of a man offering an option and waiting for the appropriate authority to exercise it. Downs noted this in his written report afterward, as the single most tactically disciplined act he had witnessed in direct action, a breacher with an armed solution in his hand, in an ambiguous threat environment, choosing to wait for command authorization in precisely the moment where waiting cost him the most. Downs pulled the pin himself. He activated the grenade on a 3-second delay fuse and placed it on the ground between the main element and the eastern position. Not as a weapon, but as a test. Every operator trained in thermobaric employment knew the survivability profile at 2 meters, manageable if you were in the correct stance and the correct kit. Every human in the formation held position. The figure at the eastern edge did not. It moved backward with the fluid, multi-jointed reversal of something whose knee geometry has no human analog. Knees reversing, spine extending, the hands spreading into the trifurcated configuration that no equipment manufactured by any human entity could replicate. It was across the LZ perimeter and into the tree line before the fuse expired. The detonation lit the perimeter in orange-white for 1 second, and in that second, every camera and NVG system in the formation recorded the silhouette at the forest edge. 270 centimeters, dropped 2 forelimbs at the first trunk line, amber eyes at 2 meters off the ground, watching the fire with the patience of something that has learned to wait. The helicopter touched down at the northwest corner of the LZ, and the load executed in under 40 seconds. 12 operators, equipment packages, the sample containers. Witt's tablet physically disconnected from its network before she crossed the threshold. The rotor was climbing before the last boot cleared the skid. Downs counted in the cabin. 12. He counted again. 12. He told himself he would count until the number returned 12 consistently, without his having to decide to believe it. It took 7 counts over the first 15 minutes of flight. Malcolm Wilson, who had not spoken since the formation count, said from the starboard position in a tone that was neither question nor statement. It jumped. Downs said, "I know," Wilson said, from 100 meters up. The cabin held that silence for several seconds over rotor noise. Then Downs said, "I know." The forest below the aircraft was dark, and the pilot's thermal heads-up display showed nothing moving in it, which meant the Alpha was either gone, or it had learned, among all the other things it had learned that night, how to suppress its own thermal signature from aerial observation. No one said this out loud. Some operational conclusions are best carried unvoiced when there is no longer any ground beneath the aircraft, and nowhere to go but up and away from the thing you have just confirmed you could not stop. 11 of the 12 operators who inserted into Sector 7 Delta on May 14th were cleared for redeployment within 90 days. The 12th PO1. Dylan Reed was placed on indefinite medical leave with a diagnosis that the public record describes as acoustic trauma. He has not transmitted on any military radio frequency since that night. His personal rule, according to the one interview he gave to a closed JSOC review board, is that he does not respond to any voice he cannot see the face of. He considers this reasonable precaution. His evaluating physician considers it a clinical presentation. The distinction may be academic. The biological samples recovered from the downed subordinate were transferred within 48 hours of extraction to a facility that does not appear in any unclassified database. Aviana Witt was debriefed separately and returned to her previous assignment. She answered no questions about what the 2019 DARPA study concluded. She answered no questions at all. The extraction flight's cockpit voice recorder logged an anomaly at the 43-minute mark, a transmission on the secondary channel that the pilot could not account for, authenticated, carrying the correct protocol header for Unit 0's operational net. The content was 7 seconds of silence followed by a single word spoken in LCDR Marvin Downs' voice. The word was the operational code phrase for the mission, the word that 12 operators had been given on index cards before insertion. The transmission was logged, flagged, and forwarded to the Signals Intelligence Division responsible for Unit 0's communications, security. The investigation into the source of that transmission is, as of the date of this account, still open. What it means, whether the Alpha was transmitting from the forest below the aircraft, whether it had retained the code phrase from the night's intercept, whether the voice was Downs at all, or a reconstruction accurate enough to fool the authentication layer, has not been officially determined. Some things the official record refuses to close, not because the answer is unavailable, but because closing it would require acknowledging what produced it. If you have ever been in an isolated place, a forest, a field, a corridor at 3 in the morning, and heard a familiar voice call your name from a direction you were certain was empty, the instinct is to answer. The Unit 0 debrief protocol added one instruction to its standard post-operation checklist after the night of May 14th. It reads, "If you hear your own call sign in a place where no one should know it, do not speak, do not move, do not confirm that you received it. Because confirmation is not communication. Confirmation is a sample, and whatever is listening on the other end of that transmission does not need your words. It only needs your voice. Subscribe to The World Behind Midnight to uncover the next operation before it disappears, because some secrets are best left behind midnight."